Imagine you're standing on the side of a freezing mountain in a total whiteout blizzard. You have incomplete coordinates, the temperature is rapidly dropping, and all you really know for sure is that someone is missing.
Right.
Now, I want you to imagine you were sitting in a quiet, brightly lit high school math class.
Which is quite the pivot.
It sounds completely absurd, I know. But the survival mechanics required to navigate both of these situations are actually practically identical. Welcome to today's deep dive. We're looking at a fascinating source document today titled, "What a DSL Can Learn from a Mountain Rescue Volunteer."
And just for context here, a DSL is a designated safeguarding lead. I mean, they are the professionals in schools and organizations whose entire job is protecting vulnerable kids and adults.
Exactly. And our mission for this deep dive is to extract the actionable leadership and crisis response lessons from this text by overlaying the rugged, physical world of a mountain rescue onto the highly complex, deeply emotional world of safeguarding.
It's a really unique way to look at it.
Okay, let's unpack this, because connecting the literal freezing terrain of a mountain to the emotional terrain of a vulnerable student is, well, it's one of the most bizarre yet incredibly perfect analogies I have ever come across.
What's fascinating here is that both of these roles, the rescue volunteer and the safeguarding lead, they share a fundamental underlying challenge that most leadership books just completely ignore.
Oh, totally. They skip right over it.
They really do. And it's that they both operate in extreme crisis environments. And a crisis environment, by its very nature, severely distorts four critical things. It distorts communication, judgment, perspective, and memory.
Wow. Okay, so you are never operating with a clean slate.
Never. You are always operating in a fog. And the text we're examining today uses this comparison to completely dismantle how we think about decision-making under pressure.
And that fog, it rolls in right at the absolute beginning of any crisis, doesn't it? Like right at the initial call for help.
Exactly. The very first moment.
Because when you watch a movie, the call for help is dramatic, but it's mathematically precise. Someone radios in and says, "I am at these exact coordinates, I have a broken leg, send a helicopter."
Right, it's all perfectly packaged.
Yeah, but the reality on a mountain is totally different. A rescue volunteer knows the emergency call never arrives with the full story.
Never.
They get a fragmented message. They hear, a hiker didn't return to their car, or they
Yeah.
get partial coordinates from a dropped cell signal, all while the weather is actively worsening.
And waiting for a perfect visual on a mountain. I mean, that guarantees a body recovery, not a rescue.
Oh, wow. That's bleak.
It's bleak, but it's true. The mountain rescue team mobilizes immediately based on that fragmented information. They do not sit at base camp drinking coffee, waiting for the fog to clear so they can get definitive proof of the hiker's location.
Because they know the rule.
Right. They know the core mechanism of a crisis, which is that delay increases danger and isolation increases risk. A vulnerable person simply cannot remain alone in hazardous terrain while the professionals wait for perfect paperwork.
Which maps so perfectly onto the daily reality of a safeguarding professional.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, DSLs don't get a neatly typed memo saying student X is experiencing exactly this type of trauma at home.
No, of course not.
They receive concerns that are totally fragmented, deeply emotional, and half the time completely contradictory.
Oh, yeah.
The alert is usually a teacher in the hallway saying, a student is just not themselves today, or it's a vague rumor, or a residential boarder simply hasn't come back to their room.
And in safeguarding, waiting for complete clarity in those moments is actually the most dangerous thing you can do.
Wait, really? The most dangerous?
Yes. You have to make early decisions before the full picture exists. The professional truth outlined in our source is that waiting for complete certainty allows the safeguarding risk to compound exponentially. You must move toward the situation based on cumulative concern rather than definitive proof.
Okay, I have to push back on that for a second. Just playing devil's advocate for you listening. Isn't acting without the facts incredibly dangerous too?
It's a valid concern.
Like if a DSL intervenes in a complex family situation or pulls a student out of class based on just a vague feeling, doesn't that risk making things way worse? It feels a bit like trying to read the entire instruction manual for a fire extinguisher while the kitchen is, actively burning.
Right.
Sure, but if you just spray the foam wildly without knowing what kind of fire it is, you might ruin the whole house.
That tension, that exact fear, is why this role is so difficult. But moving toward a vulnerable situation does not mean executing a final, heavy-handed judgment.
Okay, so what does it mean then?
In safeguarding, acting on cumulative concern simply means early welfare checks. It means initiating a gentle conversation.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it is an escalation of curiosity and support, not an escalation of punitive action. The mechanism here is about closing the gap of isolation. You are deploying the rescue team to the general grid reference to establish contact. You aren't dropping a bomb on the mountain.
Right.
You move early because, as the text emphasizes, vulnerability almost never happens overnight. It develops incrementally.
That incremental development is such a crucial piece of this puzzle. Because nobody wakes up, stretches, and says, I think I'll get completely lost on a freezing mountain today.
Exactly. Nobody plans for it.
It starts with one minor wrong turn. Then they take another turn to try and correct the first one. Then the sun starts to set, the temperature drops, the fog rolls in, and suddenly they're utterly stranded.
And mountain rescue teams rarely find people who intended to do something reckless. They find people who are isolated, overwhelmed, and lost in conditions that have slowly compounded beyond their capacity to manage safely alone.
Which translates to safeguarding so seamlessly.
Absolutely seamless. Students become emotionally stranded in the exact same way. They get lost in the complex terrain of trauma, exploitation, online harm, family breakdown,
Or an escalating mental health crisis.
Precisely.
But on a mountain, someone is physically missing. In a school, the student is sitting right there in the third row of history class.
Right, they are physically present.
So my hypothesis here, if I'm a professional looking at a kid whose grades are dropping or who's pulling away from their friends, my instinct is to think, well, they're just being a moody teenager or they're just being lazy. How do you spot this incremental drift when the person is physically right in front of you?
Well, you have to understand the psychological mechanics of vulnerability, and specifically the compounding nature of shame.
Shame. Okay.
Shame and isolation are the weather conditions that trap people.
Yeah.
When a student makes a mistake online or experiences trauma, their brain's immediate defense mechanism is to hide. And that hiding breeds shame. The shame increases their isolation, which makes the emotional weather around them even colder and more dangerous. The visible signs you mentioned, the social withdrawal, the sudden academic drop, or escalating emotional distress, those are not the crisis itself.
They are the flares.
Yes, they are the flares sent up from a dangerous emotional altitude. The text makes it clear that this vulnerability develops incrementally long before it becomes visible externally. So when a DSL sees those flares, they aren't looking at a lazy student. They are looking at someone who has gradually found themselves entirely emotionally stranded. The teenager in the crowded cafeteria can be just as isolated as the hiker in the ravine.
So let's say the professional spots that flare. They gather their cumulative concern, they don't wait for perfect clarity, and they make the move. They initiate the conversation.
They've arrived on the scene.
Exactly. We have arrived at the scene. But once you reach the actual scene, whether it is a physical mountain or a safeguarding meeting in an office, the conditions are guaranteed to change. The situation is almost never what you expected.
Rescue teams constantly discover that the initial report was wrong. The risks have escalated, or entirely new, unexpected hazards are present.
Right.
In safeguarding, your early assumptions must remain completely flexible until a fuller context emerges through wider investigation. If you walk into that room rigidly convinced you already know what the problem is, your confirmation bias will cause you to miss the actual underlying danger.
See, this is the paradox that really caught me off guard. You'd think the priority in that moment is immediately fixing the problem, solving the crisis.
It's what we want to do.
But the text argues that the absolute first priority is emotional containment. On the mountain, rescue teams rely on calm communication and emotional steadiness because panic literally narrows your cognitive bandwidth. It destabilizes the team and increases the physical danger.
And when you map that onto a school or an organization, imagine you are the adult stepping into a room with a student who is experiencing an absolute emotional crisis. That student's internal nervous system is in a state of total chaos. Their fight or flight response is fully activated. What they desperately need in that moment is predictability.
Here's where it gets really interesting to me. It makes me think of the ballast in a ship during a massive storm.
Oh, that's a great analogy.
Right. The student in crisis is the sail, and right now they are catching all of that chaotic, destructive wind. But if you, the adult professional, have a heavy, submerged, steady, emotional ballast, the boat isn't going to capsize. The student's nervous system will literally look to yours for cues on how to act.
That is the exact mechanism of emotional co-regulation. A dysregulated adult simply cannot regulate a dysregulated child.
Right.
Our nervous systems utilize mirror neurons. We subconsciously mimic the emotional state of the people in charge. If a DSL walks into the room visibly stressed, panicked about the legal implications, or frantic about how the parents are going to react, they are not acting as a ballast.
They're just adding hurricane winds to the student's blizzard. So the adult's job isn't necessarily to have all the answers right away. Their immediate job is to absorb the panic without reflecting it back.
Yes. A leader's primary function in a crisis is to regulate the emotional atmosphere. The text refers to this as human-centered safeguarding support.
Which doesn't mean being a robot, right?
No, emotional containment doesn't mean being cold, detached, or robotic. It means providing a steady, reliable presence. It means implementing structured safeguarding meetings and maintaining measured, calm communication with your staff and the families involved.
But with all this talk of high-stakes crisis and rapid deployments and plunging into the blizzard to save the lost soul, it is dangerously easy to fall into a trap.
Yeah.
And the source document is incredibly honest about this.
It really is.
It points out exactly where this mountain rescue analogy hits a wall, specifically when dealing with the myth of the lone action hero.
Because on a mountain, rescue work is fundamentally about systemic coordination. Teamwork matters vastly more than individual heroics. In the educational space, strong safeguarding systems rely on that exact same collaborative reflection and interdisciplinary support. The text drops a hard truth here. Safeguarding systems fail more often through fragmentation than through a lack of individual care.
Because no single professional can carry a complex, escalating crisis entirely alone without breaking.
It's a systemic load.
It has to be shared.
But there's a deeper psychological trap here, isn't there? Because the lone hero narrative is completely baked into our culture. You watch any movie about a dedicated teacher, and it is always a lone wolf who breaks all the rules, works 90 hours a week, and single-handedly saves the troubled kid from a dark path.
We love that story.
We do. So what does this all mean for the passionate lone wolf professional who just genuinely wants to save the day?
This raises an important question because it means they have to fundamentally reevaluate their approach. A savior complex actually harms the student.
Wow. Harmful. Yes. The text explicitly states what DSLs must not take from this analogy. Students are not problems to rescue. This points to the vast difference between physical survival and emotional recovery.
Right, because on the mountain, the goal is purely physical extraction. You stabilize the broken leg, you put the person in a helicopter, and you physically remove them from the hazard.
Okay.
The operation has a definitive, clean end.
But safeguarding operates in an educational and relational context. Emotional recovery is vastly more complex than physical retrieval.
That makes sense.
If a professional adopts a savior mentality, it centers the adult's need to feel like a hero over the student's need for sustainable empowerment. It creates a toxic dependency. The goal in safeguarding isn't a dramatic one-time rescue. It is ongoing pastoral care that slowly, systematically helps the student build the capacity to navigate their own emotional terrain safely.
So the immediate storm passes. The student is physically safe, the emotional tempest has been contained, and the long-term pastoral care is in place.
Yeah.
Naturally, human instinct is to breathe a massive sigh of relief and just move on with our lives.
Of course.
But doing that guarantees the exact same crisis will happen again. How do we prevent that? Because according to the source, this post-rescue reality is where the most crucial systemic work actually happens.
After every single mountain rescue, regardless of whether it was a success or a tragedy, the teams review their decisions, they examine their communication protocols, and they reflect on their mistakes.
Even the successful ones.
Especially the successful ones. They don't do this to assign blame. They do it because systematic reflection literally improves the survival odds for the next callout. Strong, safeguarding cultures require the exact same post-incident learning.
The text mentions that safeguarding maturity depends on non-defensive case reviews and reflective supervision. But let's look at the actual mechanics of that. How do you run a meeting where you examine a near miss or a severe crisis without triggering human defensiveness?
It's tough.
Right, because when the adrenaline wears off, people's instinct is to cover their own tracks and point fingers. How do you stop that?
The trick is entirely structural. It requires an intentional shift from asking who messed up to asking, where did our system break down?
Oh, that's a big shift.
Huge. When you sit a professional down and ask, why did you do this? You immediately trigger their amygdala, their threat response activates, their prefrontal cortex shuts down, and they defend their ego.
Naturally.
But if you run a non-defensive case review, you change the question entirely. You ask, walk us through the information you had at 2 p.m. that made this seem like the most logical choice at the time.
Oh, wow. Because that completely shifts the blame from the individual's character to the environment they were operating in. It acknowledges the fog.
Exactly. It views near misses, difficult referrals, and challenging incidents as gold mines for organizational learning rather than indictments of individual failure.
That is so smart.
If staff are expected to act on cumulative concern before perfect clarity exists, as we established earlier, they must know that leadership will support them during the review process. If the culture is punitive, people will hesitate the next time a crisis bubbles up.
And wait for perfect clarity.
Right. They will wait for perfect clarity to protect their own jobs, which we know increases the danger to the vulnerable person. The ultimate goal of the debrief isn't just to ensure safety for the student. It is to provide sustainable, structural, emotional support for the exhausted staff.
Which brings us full circle. For you listening right now, whether you are managing a corporate team, running a family, or leading a classroom, the underlying mechanics of crisis, isolation, and decision-making are exactly the same.
They really are universal.
We have journeyed through the absolute necessity of acting before certainty. We've looked at the reality of moving toward vulnerability, even when it's uncomfortable, the sheer superpower of being an emotional ballast for someone else, and the importance of ditching the lone wolf savior complex in favor of a learning-oriented team. Think about how you handle incomplete, stressful information in your own life. Do you freeze in the whiteout, waiting for the perfect coordinates, or do you move toward the cumulative concern?
And as you reflect on that, I want to leave you with the final provocative thought directly from our source material. It is a fundamental question of systemic maturity. When the equivalent of a callout happens in your setting, are you only responding to the crisis itself, or are you intentionally learning from it so that the next response is safer and wiser for everyone involved?
And I want to leave you with one final thought to mull over, building on that idea. This entire document, this whole brilliant analogy, focuses on rescuing vulnerable students or external clients. But we established today that vulnerability develops incrementally and silently.
It does.
It is a slow, compounding drift into shame and isolation long before the visible flare goes up. So if that is true, what quiet signals of emotional drift are you currently missing in your adult peers? What flares are your coworkers, your friends, or even you yourself sending up right now that are being entirely ignored simply because no one has explicitly called for a rescue yet? The terrain of isolation doesn't care how old you are, and the weather is just as cold for the adults. Keep your eyes open for the flares.